welcome to this week's episode of Menu Combat. This episode where you hear something about what I'm grinding, something I'm reflecting on, and then what are the bard's tales of the week. And this week, and I think if you would listen to the last episode I did with Jeremiah, we're talking about Fire Emblem 7. In the time that it dropped on NSO to today, I finished it this morning, technically. And I got some thoughts. But I do want to just even lay the groundwork. I mentioned last week that a lot of my taste is informed by Fire Emblem. And I think what I want to highlight further, it's very much of beating this for me was very much of like dealing with a gaming white whale, right? So I'm terrible at video games. Let me be one of those things that I try to be very explicit about this podcast. I'm not a great video gamer. And I mean that I'm not always thinking tactically if I'm talking about something more strategic, like most of the games on Menu Combat. But I'm also not talking about like my split-second decisions are just not great. And so when I say that I love video games, but I've not been able to beat them for a lot of years, I mean that. It really isn't over the last 4-5 years have I really built more of that as a consistent thing that I would do. And so when it comes to beating Fire Emblem, it's like fulfilling a childhood promise to myself. And there are a couple other games that fit into that mold that I guess I'll mention that fit the same mold, where it's a game that I was obsessed over. I had deep love for. I thought about consistently. It informed the types of games I would look forward to buying, but I just couldn't beat it. And so Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, Beautiful Joe 2, and Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Those are four gaming white whales of like my youth that have like really spoke to who I was, who I am, but I never beat them. And this moment in my life, beating Fire Emblem is very much of like, it's not the same, but it's like, I finally like did what 15, 14-year-old TheWolvesDen has desired to do. And so even before I get into like the nuts and bolts of some of Fire Emblem, the Blazing Blade, I'm curious, what are some of your gaming white whales of your youth that mean so much to you, but maybe you don't have them now, or you sold the game, which is obviously a big one for a lot of people my age. But you're like, man, I can't wait to go back and beat that and finish what is still important to you. And so I guess one of the things that when we talk about like the greatness of Fire Emblem or what's really important, one of the things that we always talk about are the importance of maps. So here's one of the challenging things I think with tactical games is remembering the maps you played. So I know for a lot of people deep into tactical community, they have a real deep commitment of remembering what the maps were like. I have a general idea and gist of how the maps played out as an overarching experience, but it takes a lot for a map to stand out and be memorable for me. And that's interesting, right? I love tactical games, but I think for me, it is less about the grand tactical strategy and more of like the into moment to moment decision making, if I find that satisfying and involving. But there are a couple here that I think I'll hold on to. I will say the thing that stands out the most in this Fire Emblem, but I now get as a mechanic that I appreciate, are the Fog of War maps. There are several in this game, and they're all delightful. The one that comes to mind, I think it is chapter 16, 17. It's towards where you get to the Dragon's Gate the first time, and you get Dart. Come off the boat with Fargus, you meet Dart. Dart comes with you, and then you're in a Fog of War map. And I was just truly surprised at how moving in a space, because they do give you torches, but moving and trying to make decisions that are blind of like, okay, I split my group into these two components. This group that has, I think it was Lynn and Hector, and trying to get that group, I think one might have been Canis. Do you have Canis at that time? You do have Canis. I think those are the three that I carried in one location. I carried Elliewood and Dart in one other location. I had them re-meet up, but you don't see how the map is coming together, particularly because you're trying to make decisions of, all right, what enemy might be here? who can tank a hit, who can tank a mage, who can tank a sword. And so you're making decisions like that. So even back at your home base where Marylandus is deployed, I'm putting down a guy, I'm putting down Sane with swords because I'm like, okay, mainly pirates are coming. So you can see I'm thinking about how the map came together as a set of progress. I'm thinking about, I ended up feeling like all my units had something to do. And I felt like I was making the best guesses without knowing what was coming next. And I'm thinking particularly on the bottom part of the map, I think it was Lowen. It was Lowen. I had Sarah, Florina. You get another one, Fiora, and Lucius, all in the same place. And I'm like, okay, there are going to be arrow folks coming, so how do I push my both my mages who have terrible defense, Florina who's susceptible to arrows, away from the units I want them to be attracted to in terms of be Lowen and be who is my general in this game? Not Wallace, the other guy. It'll come back to me later. Oswayne, that's who it is. Hey, can you see how detailed and unpacking the way that I thought about this map and the decisions I made? I don't know if I've ever been that vivid about the decisions I made and predicting and guessing. It was wonderful. And they play with it, right? So I'm really trying to think, it's like, have I played another Fog of War map like this? There have one where you're going into the tower where Nino is. After Nino, I think, is it Zephiel? It might be Zephiel, whoever the child is that they're trying to steal the Fire Emblem from. You go in with Nino, and the entire place is pitch black because they do a blackout. And I'm like, wait, that's such a great conceit to both bring in a Fog of War map inside of a castle. Like, I feel daft because I don't think I've ever seen anything that Fire Emblem has done in that manner of the games I've tried. And that's when I'm like, oh, Fog of War is a way better map gimmick than I've ever given it credit for, because I get so afraid. I think that's one of the things I also learned about this run through is that how defensive of a player I am. Like, I looked at my ending list of levels and it tells you how many turns. I started seeing 30 turns, 54 turns. I'm like, golly. But I'm pretty defensive, and that bit me in the ass a couple of times. I'm thinking about that same map with when you recruit Nino. I lost the Delphi shield. So for those who don't know, the Delphi shield is what you attach to your flyer to make them impervious to arrows. And I wish I could have gotten that. But one of the things I've learned, and I realized there's some small mechanics that really change how you see this game, is that, so any place where there's treasure, they usually send out enemy thieves to be able to get them. And so it doesn't feel weird because every time up to that point, if you beat the enemy thief, when they collect it, they'll just drop it. But now what happens is that because these are rooms with multiple treasures, the only one that you can get is the most recent one that they got. So you will lose one of them. And that was painful. But I think it's such a good mechanic, right? Because if I were to replay it, that's an incentive for me to figure out how to play faster. Because my natural desire is to slow down. And I think it's even better than just the town stuff. Because the town stuff, I kind of look at it as like, well, that's beyond my control. And the town stuff could sometimes give you something cool, sometimes it doesn't. I feel like with chess, especially because of how minimal or resource scarce the game can feel, it feels like, oh, damn, I really lost something truly valuable and important whenever this happens. And so I even just want to highlight it as a good mechanic. In fact, I realized a lot of stuff. So I did a lot more research playing this game before, compared to, like, obviously my childhood. Obviously, as childhood, you have game facts, you have things of that nature. But when I played 7 originally, it was, I think, emulated. I know it was emulated, but I can't remember if it was English and Japanese. It might have been one. I'm guessing it was in English. But I more so say it's like, obviously I was online for when it released. This, I paid some more details to how did people describe certain things to not lose, because I didn't want to lose. But more importantly, I was like, wait, what the hell? How was I supposed to figure this out? is the moment you learn about secret stores. Look, man, I played 7 a little bit as a child. I spent more time on Sacred Stones as a child. I played Awakening. I played Fates. I played Shadows of Valentia. I respected the hell out of Anna. I did not realize that Anna was essentially not just like an important story character, but the secret shop. How was I supposed to know that? It's one of those things where you're like, dang, my gaming ancestors were just so skilled to have put it together. So essentially in, I think it's map 19, if you do not steal, you can't just kill this enemy. If you steal the secret membership card, you get access to secret stores that appear on certain maps, which is just insane. And it changes how I view this, because when I go into Sacred Stones, I'm going to see if I can pull it off, right? Man, I feel so like dumb for not having known this as a general Fire Emblem mechanic. It was great. It was great. This, as you can tell, I am truly appreciative. And I think what surprised me is that when I played up for the first 16 chapters, and obviously the first 10 is Lynn's story, which obviously if you've played a Fire Emblem before, most of that is straightforward. If you play reckless, you still lose, but it's not anything painful. It wasn't until towards the second half, I'm talking about when you get to Dragon's Gate, after you meet Falgar and them, does the difficulty spike? Does the strategy and real thinking in these particular ways really develop? Notice that all the maps I'm highlighting are really after that. And if I spoke right around chapter 20, I would have not really been this enthused about what this game was. I would have been saying, oh, it's a little basic, it's a little bit straightforward, it's still nice because it's elegant. But I underestimate how good these maps are. I underestimated some of the mechanical values here, and it was wonderful. I think one of the things that made it really difficult to play this time around was trying to make decisions about what characters I want, and because that's the one thing I was terrible at when I played Fire Emblem as a child. I treated it like Pokemon, which is like trying to evenly distribute the EXP to everyone, but that's not how you play these games, right? They give you new characters to reload if you lost somebody. And so being more free to be like, okay, benching this person for this because they have more statistical vantage. But I'm always scared of making decisions like that because I'm like, are those decisions more important than story-based decisions? And I'll tell you a good one that like bothered me for a while. Legault. By the time Legault shows up, I'd not done a good job at training Matthew, and I don't think the game sets you up well. Mind you, Matthew has some good story reasons for not being in certain battles. You learn about him being a spy, which is why he missed one battle. Him losing Layla was such another great like story moment. So you are like, okay, I gotta let Matthew run this thief assassin thing. But by the time you meet Legault is like lapping him in experience points, lapping him in stats. And you're like, is it worth it? And I kept on having to ask myself that question over and over because the same thing happens when I'm trading up Legault and they bring you Jafar. Jafar's stats still outclass Legault, but I was like, but this is the guy I developed. And I think that is one of the interesting tensions that this game brings up, right? Because as I said, I'm terrible. So sometimes I do think stats matter a lot, but I'm like, I want to be invested in the story. I want to be invested in these characters. And one of the things that does that is by using them consistently. And then that's how you get the supports. That's how you get these other elements. And I think I'm curious for those who play these tactical games, this one more than any other ones, how do you make these decisions? Do you make it about statistical value? Or do you make it about cool designs? Or do you make it about just strictly their personality? I think that's a hard thing to really make a decision of in Fire Emblem in general, but coming back to this where I felt like you can't reclass forever, or even though I have some of the rewind abilities because of Nintendo Switch Online, you will be punished. So I'm curious, what are some of the decisions you guys made as you played through this? Now let's get into some other things that are interesting. I want to say these weapons are whack. Look, I think this game does a disservice in many ways to the lords. Hector, Lynn, and Eliwood, great cast, great It's great to see them interact with one another. It's great to see Lynn and Eliwood supports mimic a little bit of what Lynn and Hector's supports are. Hearing Hector and Eliwood get closer and how that really builds into the epilogue. Like, they do a good job from a story perspective to really be important. I even think they do a good job in terms of feeling mechanically varied. The fact that Eliwood becomes a mount when he promotes, the fact that Lynn gets a bow, a shout out to the Sakaean people, which is a good, nice little touch about who she is. Hector just becomes amazing with his axes. I like all three of them, even though I know statistically they aren't great. But you want to know what really shows that they're not statistically great? Beating the damn dragon at the end of the game. See, they give you, what the thing is, Atos. Atos is like building up the fact that you're getting these two legendary weapons, because he's like, Lynn, yours is not legendary, my bad. But I'm just disappointed in the output of these weapons. See, up until that point, let me use Lynn as a good example. The Mani Katti that you get in like chapter 6 is that is effective all the way through. And so my brain is like, oh, if the Mani Katti is fire, her skills improved, her speed is improved, her stats are improved. Oh, give me the Soul Katti, because this final level is gonna be crazy. Anytime I want to use it, I will not get a double hit, but everyone will double hit her. I've never used it, barely. And that happened with Hector's, I think it's the Madras, Madras axe, or the same thing with Eliwood and the Drundal. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, I've been building these guys. Not only do you delay their promotion equipment until the near end game so they can't get high levels at the end, you punish them with their legendary weapons. That does not make sense. I've been trying to rack my brain of like, what was I supposed to have done to make this a much more joyous thing? Because I think that's what's disappointing. It's not just that they weren't effective, it just didn't feel fun to use. I felt like I was going to be exploited and I didn't get anything from it. And I was like, okay, maybe, because the cool thing about the final battle is that it's like resurrected 8 bosses. It's like it's a little boss rush, which is cool. And so maybe I'm like, okay, maybe it doesn't work against bosses, but let me use it as Nurgle. Let it be effective against Nurgle. Why I'll trade it to make it legendary? It can't work against the main boss. Then you're like, okay, maybe it's going to be effective against the dragon, because it makes sense, right? This was done with the guys who were there in Arcadia with the dragons. So yes, I'll bet you it's going to work against the dragon. It did not. It did not. It was whack. I will go as far to say it might be some of the worst legendary weapons. People can point to a bunch of other games, but this, you could see it in my heart. This was whack. I think one of the key things that I've been trying to wrestle with beyond that is whether or not I cared about this story. So my brain is thinking in a couple of places. There's a lot of tragedy in this game. Let's think about it. Lynn loses her father. Eliwood loses his father. He technically loses Ninian. It's a bunch of like people dying. But I asked myself whether or not I felt it. And I think that was my really struggle. I think they did a good job in making you feel that you lost, what's the person's name? You lost Ninian, right? Because it's a little bit messy how they do that, which is show her that she's a dragon, gets him to slay the dragon because he felt it in the blade, But they do a lot of tragedy. I'm thinking the image that they show with Eliwood holding Ninian, and Nils is like, you feel it. But I'm thinking about the other deaths. I'm sorry, I realized, Lynn doesn't lose Lundgren. You think that she does, but she doesn't really lose Lundgren. So really all the losses through Eliwood. And so I'm like, does losing his father or losing Ninian really hit you? And Matthew loses Layla. I don't know. And I think I look back to the story. One of the things I've used to say is like, I didn't really understand the machinations of Fire Emblem stories, but this one I find partially because I've been a part of reading these stories or playing more games of these stories. I understand Lycia better. I understand the different factions. I understand the history a little bit better. And so I enjoyed what I saw from the lower part, but I'm also very much of like, this is cool. Like, the supports are cool. And that leads into one of the things I do want to highlight that modern Fire Emblem has done better. So I know that Fire Emblem 6, the one before this, introduces the idea of supports, which is just a great idea. If these are characters and not just units, pawns on a field, it's a good idea to build relationships. I think I just never want to talk in battle. Never. Because it interrupts the process. It interrupts your experience. And I realize that's one of the things I like about Awakening. It's like, it's a reward for how you strategize in battle, but I want battle to be battle and support and learning afterwards. And so it's one of those things where it's like the GBA era didn't do that. I don't know if the DS era did that, but it's one of the best things that specifically the 3DS era and onward is really effective at. But I also don't know if I'm really going to penalize just a straightforward story for any issues. I mean, you still get the relationship between Lynn, Hector, and Eliwood, and I even highlighted the supports of those three. And I also feel like some of the ways that you talk about supports written in bad and Awakening, I feel like you can see it here. There's no meat on the bone, at least from what I've experienced with specifically looking at the relationship between Florina and Lynn. I feel like that could easily have been thrown into a lot of the critiques that people throw at Awakening. And so I say that to say the story's solid. It's not amazing. I think maybe if I played 6 and the epilogue really sits different, I might appreciate some of the world building. But outside of that, I'm not feeling the story. But I'm also like, this game mechanically is just really elegant, right? Like, we're talking about just having the triangle, the weapon triangle, the magic triangle, the map gimmicks, and just the mechanics of units. It's always going to be good. Like, is there really... this is probably a dumb question because I haven't played it. But I'm like, I'm sure there are terrible Fire Emblem games. But, like, the basic fits of Fire Emblem are just so good that even some of these detriments or questions I'm asking don't bother me. And I think, as I said, the purity of the maps here and just really getting better at using these units and reading how things are thinking. Like, I'm thinking the second to last level that is long. It's where Eliwood promotes with the Swordmaster as the main boss. That map is forever, and it's like I lose and I restart, and I'm like, okay, if I make these adjustments, if I make this crew, which is Hector and Hawkeye, in one place, make certain decisions, and then I'm like, if I can bait people to come in this direction from the left side that's pretty far away, using Lowen because he has high defense, and then draw them to get attacked by my magicians, like, I'm thinking deeply, and I think the maps really do a good job of doing that. And I think about some of the places where I made terrible mistakes, or I lost to visit a village. It's like one of those things where it's like, if I get more skilled at building my character list and thinking more thoughtfully, I'll even do better. So this was a great game. I loved it a lot. It fulfilled my childhood appreciation. It's as good as I remember, and better because I played more of it. Excellent game. But what this got me thinking about, so what did this grinding get me to think about? Fighting in towns. And I might have made a mention of it before, but I think about one of the inherent benefits of tactical games is that a skirmish can happen everywhere, right? Like, even if we go back to triangle strategy, it's all in the places where you're talking to people, you're learning where things are happening, and a fight will break out there. Fire Emblem will take place in castles, in towns, in islands, and it, because of how mechanically overboard it is in terms of, like, it's more of a map driven thing, it doesn't need to be a physical representation. And that's the same thing with most strategy games. Now, I'm curious to see what Valkyria Chronicles does, because obviously they don't have that benefit. But I think tactical games have an inherent benefit compared to other JRPGs to do battles in towns, because you don't have to worry about people's anticipation of towns being either a rest area, or you don't have to, like, if you're doing an action RPG, like, how do you design the town so that your battle doesn't interfere with the environment? And I was trying to think about, like, what are some of the different ways that different games use these approaches? And the one that I'm thinking about right now is Tales of Vesperia, right? Tales of Vesperia has a battle in, I think, Zaphias at the very beginning when you exit the sewers and you're still battling in the overworld. And it's just a huge space, and what they do is that you still break into battle, right? Like, it's not in the actual overworld, it's like people who represent, or blobs that represent the battles. So therefore it's like break inside, and so therefore they don't have to worry about the larger environment, but it still has to look like the larger environment anyway. It's like it's that back and forth. And I see the same thing in Tales of Arise. Tales of Arise does a similar approach, and I don't think there's anything super special about how else they did it in Vesperia, but it's something that I'm like, wait, you could do some cool story stuff. And so I'm thinking about Clara in Final Fantasy IX, where you have to make decisions about who gets saved and where you move based on the raid in Clara. It's so good when you play around with that, because that makes you feel something. So I highlighted 2 weeks ago with the Dragon Quest, where the special town was so different that it makes you feel like, oh, this is important. But I also highlighted that they made it ruins. People weren't there. And I think that's the piece that makes it interesting. It's like, how can you have people be there? How can you treat a town mechanically as a town while having these battles go on? And I'm thinking Earthbound does a great job. I'm even thinking the very first town, where you still have to like walk around the enemies that are still around, or you go to the zombie town, and I think Threed. Like, they do a very compelling job where even though you go to the town and that's the rest spot, if you're also not careful in some of the locations, you're going to get attacked. And I think that builds some character of the town, because you could do certain enemies that represent certain things in those locations, or you can do it for dramatic effect. I'm thinking someplace people that don't do this very well. I'm thinking Pokemon and Chrono Trigger, right? Pokemon battles only happen in town with your rival. You don't ever have wild Pokemon inside of a town. Maybe they should introduce that. Maybe there's some mechanical value, or to make something feel special. I'm thinking about the roaming legendaries and how important those feel when you go area to area. Maybe there should be a legendary Pokemon that's only found in towns, or having a relationship with people. Maybe that could like provide some unique framing of animals. I'm even thinking about, you don't even do that in Legends Arceus, right? And maybe Legends Arceus is a better place for it, right? Because that's the place where humans and Pokemon are building relationships. That battles in town might make more sense. Like, is there a Pokemon that's causing an issue to this person's crop and having to battle the crop? Like, something like that, where you would get some more fleshing out of the world by having the local battles. Chrono Trigger is interesting because I don't think you do any battles in any town, right? And I mentioned Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest doesn't typically do that. The place that does it, and it makes it oppressive, is Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Oh my gosh. Do towns not feel like a break? Like, I remember getting to certain towns and I'm like, oh, thank God. I am getting whooped the minute I get in. You die the minute you get to a town, right? You do all the battling of the world. You're like, let me go find a place to save. Let me go find a place to save, because otherwise I'm going to get mollywopped. And I think it adds to an atmospheric level of dourness in Shin Megami Tensei. The level of, I want to say, dark atmosphere, very oppressive, of when you have, where it doesn't feel like you're anywhere safe. And I think that gives it just a unique game texture compared to other games that do this mechanically, fighting in towns. So I'm curious for you, what are some of the best ways that you've seen this being done? What are some of the most like blah ways? And what are some of the games that could possibly incorporate it for some more interesting approaches and ways of seeing things? I had a lot more here, but I really do think, as I said, tactical games have such a immediate way of avoiding developing any battles in town and not making that feel restrictive. Because I think that's what it is. Even for games that go into separate screens, the reason why we don't see it often, both in terms of pacing and giving people space to relax, a lot of it is, I'm assuming, is that programming in those spaces where people are, where it is, I think people want to keep those mostly separate. And I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. Like, I'm not knocking other Final Fantasies like Final Fantasy V for not having battles in town. That doesn't make it worse per se. But there is, or there can be, an added drama, added ways of immersing yourself in that town, ways to develop stories or develop some certain ideas or create a deeper, darker mood. And so those are some of my experiences with both Fire Emblem. Those are some of my thoughts about fighting in towns, especially the reason what really made me think about it is the Castle Ostia. Like, think about it. You visit Ostia before you go to Dragon's Gate, I think I have it right. And you come back, that's like the second or third last battle. People raiding your building, you having to protect the generals. It's such a good way to like wrap the bow on the importance of Ostia as a military force, and obviously you want to do it because it's Hector's brother's place, and it's Hector's place, right? It has all these things going for it that make, man, I'm glad I had the battle here. I'm even thinking about when the pirates, where you have to fight them in town, and how, like, oh my gosh, you learn about the character of these pirates, and anything can happen anywhere. And I think that's what it is. That specific feeling, anything can happen anywhere in terms of battles and stories, it prevents a level of repetition or boredom. It means that you don't get too much into a rhythm because you never know what's next. And so let's get to the Bard's Tale this week. And I made the reference to Chrono Trigger, so I'm going to do what should have been said already. I'm picking Memories of Green from Chrono Trigger, done by Yasunori Mitsuda. All-time song. We all know it here. If you've played a JRPG, if someone you know has mentioned JRPGs and mentioned the word Chrono Trigger, and you've heard Memories of Green, and I know you've heard Memories of Green, even if you haven't played it, because you've listened to Icebox by Mario, man. Look, you want to know how good Chrono Trigger is? Check how many producers have sampled that. They've sampled it for Logic, they've sampled it for Wiz Khalifa, they've sampled it for Dom Kennedy, and they've sampled it for Omarion. The Yasunori Mitsuda was truly on some other level of skill. It is painful to actually hear that he was like nearly in health complications because this was his debut as a composer. So I don't want to ever say that pain is worth any of this art, but it is a blessing that the art that he made is so phenomenal. And again, go listen to Icebox. If you don't know that Icebox sampled this, go listen to that now and go listen to Memories of Green. It's incredible. The next one, and I was actually surprised because I've slandered my boy Matoe Sakuraba many a time, and I will continue to do it. But I was listening to some of the Tales of Graces of F soundtrack, and there's a song called Grasp with All Your Might. And I was like, wait, how much of this did Revo like listen to when making the Bravely Default soundtrack? Mainly because the percussion is so much, I feel like, feeds into what Revo was doing on Bravely Default. It is wonderful. The bass guitar just slams in your face, and you're like immersed in this warm bass. But what's so interesting is that they do the rock percussion, they do this heavy bass, but they got this like flute thing going around, so it's like not this super hard rock thing. It's this weird contrast between like flutes and light things and this like heavy metal incorporation. It's a great song. And then lastly, I want to talk about Suo Red Metropolis. This is done by Hayata Takeda. This is for the Scarlet Nexus soundtrack. Boy. Deserves a round of applause. Now, I don't know what to say. It is very much glitch hop stuff, but it's like, it doesn't feel like hip hop art or cosplay. It feels like these guys went and found an actual DJ, because the scratches that are hitting in this is incredible, which also makes me realize, oh my gosh, how many producers could do for Scarlet Nexus, because I haven't played the game, so I didn't think in that space. But if they're doing this, why couldn't like Flying Lotus do this, or Knowledge, or whatever? Like, this is hip hop with this glitchy sound effects and the synths. It's wonderful. They got this little xylophone style piano in the background. It's truly remarkable. And so those three songs are the Bard's Tale, the Hall of Fame caliber JRPG tunes. And so that wraps it up for this week's Menu Combat. We appreciate you taking the time. You can find me, the host, TheWolvesDen, at TheWolvesDen at Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, all of TheWolvesDen 25. And you can find the actual podcast on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Threads at Menu Combat. I'd love to answer any particular questions. If you have some thoughts on Fire Emblem Blazing Blade, feel free to bring them in. Or if you have any questions or thoughts about fights in towns and how mechanically interesting that can be, let me know. On that note, get some good rest. Enjoy your weekend. Don't forget, customize your party.